Hello, I'm Krista Campbell. Thank you for joining us today for MWRD, How a Story Map Made Data Sharing Easier. Before we get started, I would like to encourage you to post your questions. We will have time at the end of the webinar to answer some of them. The questions that we don't get to will be included in our Q&A follow-up document that will be posted on GeoNet after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. You will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording location. This will take about a week, so keep an eye out for that. In addition, we do have a couple of handouts during this webinar. So if you check the handouts pane, you will see 2 handouts listed there. Please download those at any time during the webinar. So let's introduce our team today. I would like to welcome the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. Today you will hear from the team that has implemented a way to easily share extensive water quality information via a story map. Patrick Sendera, Senior Application Administrator, is joined by Jennifer Wasick, Supervising Aquatic Biologist, and Josh Domina and Marty Monahan, GIS Analysts, to tell their story. David Totman, Esri's Industry Manager for Water, will start the webinar with a discussion about story maps, and then we'll go ahead and turn it over to MWRD. David?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Krista, and welcome everyone for joining us in our September meetup. And as I say, we're going to talk about story maps, but one of the interesting things that's kind of occurred to me, in talking with MWRD, we get lots of questions about when we talk about our ArcGIS for Water solution suite, folks say, do you guys have, tools for water quality? And I actually talked to the folks here at MWRD about, what would that look like? Is there a turnkey configuration of the platform that would help with water quality? And really, that's a big question, right? Because, in dealing with water quality, there are so many parameters, so many variables that you're trying to understand, and so many aspects of just basic GIS 101 and all the strong mapping and data collection and analytics support those environmental efforts. And so there's really no one package solution. And so as it turns out, packaging up all the information, all the great work that MWRD has done and putting it into story maps is probably one of the best configurations you can do to get the message out, right? To educate the public on what's going on with all the efforts. And so I think it's a classic. This is a great configuration, to present their story through story maps, to better educate and tell people what's going on. So we're going to kind of jump into a little bit about the story maps and then turn it over to MWRD. But actually, I would like to kind of get things rolling with a polling question and find out who's using them. So Krista, could you start our first polling question?
Sure. Pretty simple polling question. Are you using story maps? So if you've used any of our story map apps and templates and configured them to help at your organization, please choose yes. If you haven't done this yet, then the answer is no. If you just take a second to vote, that would be appreciated. Looks like we just have a few more people. Are you using story maps? Yes, I'm using them. They're awesome. No, I haven't had a chance to use them yet. It looks like about 65% are saying no, they haven't used them, and 35% are saying yes, we're using them. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's really useful for us to know, just to say, so my couple of minutes here of going over story maps won't be in vain. When we talk about story maps, just what are they, right? Well, they're all part of the platform. They are actually, if you go to Esri.com and go into products, you'll see story maps there, and this is the story maps main page. Really is an application with pre-configured templates that help you tell your story. And so if you go to the main story maps page, there's a section on resources that really, if you go dig in there, all sorts of tutorials that help you learn the basics, all sorts of FAQs to kind of answer all those commonly asked questions. And so I think you'll find that story maps are pretty easy to get started. There's quite the famous story here at the Esri campus where even Krista's daughter told Jack Dangerman himself that she created a story map, and it was quite the day for the water team for sure.
It was awesome. I bought her ice cream for lunch that day.
So yeah, it's so story maps are probably one of our best values, within ArcGIS, and they really are just being adopted everywhere for people telling all sorts of stories, and that kind of leads me to my next piece. One of the apps, there's lots of different configuration templates, and so if you go into the apps portion, really it asks you, what kind of story you would want to tell, because there's many templates, and these templates are pre-configured, and literally you just kind of right-click, configure them. You point to some photos, you point to a story map, you enter some text, and you kind of hit save and publish. And so if you scroll down in the apps, there's also beautiful story maps that integrate multimedia, and so the story map journal is probably one of our oldest templates, and creates a really great multimedia experience, and I'll kind of show you one here in a little bit. But probably one of our most popular are these story map cascades, and that definitely, it's kind of what you see on the internet today. Most websites have that cascading web style presence, and we have a story map configured to help you do that. So one of my favorites, though, if we go back to the story maps main page, is when you surf the gallery, right? And so when you go into the gallery, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of story maps that are configured. And of course, I'm always interested in the water ones, and I learn something new every time I go to the gallery. So you just kind of go up into the search button there in the upper left corner, and I type in water, or you type in whatever theme of choice, and it brings up hundreds of story maps, and oh my gosh, you can get lost and lose the day very quickly just learning about all the great things that folks are doing out there in the water field. And so one of our very own team members has put together this story map that we will provide the URL to. It comes from our very own Living Atlas team, and this it's a story map that compiles basically all of the different water layers that we have in the Living Atlas. So it takes you into the different rivers, so the National Hydrography data set, and we've actually moved to a feature service that cartographically shows the size of the rivers based on annualized flow. So rather than the Mississippi being a thin blue line and Shoal Creek being the same size thin line, you basically see the Mississippi is a thick blue line, and so on and so forth. And so again, lots of different characterizations of hydrography that you can embed in your own mapping applications, and then of course all the different layers on characterizing landscape, like the Surgo soils data sets and soil moisture content, and of course then all things on climate. And we have our drought monitor and all sorts of different features. So again, we will provide this URL towards the end of the webinar here, and you can download it. If anything, maybe we'll put it in our chat window there, and you all can take a look at that. And again, it's great content to include in your own story maps, to put your own data on top of that, because it is truly the Living Atlas. It's a global scale, global coverage. Now, many of those are indeed U.S. Continental data sets, but again, significant coverage for you to include. in your projects. So actually with that, I didn't want to spend much more time. I encourage you to go to the Story Maps page, go to the Resource Center, take a look at it. For those 65% of you that haven't started using Story Maps, I encourage you to do so. And I am now going to turn it over to, well, Krista and then Patrick. All right, take it away, Patrick.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. I'm Patrick Sundar. I'm a Senior Application Administrator here at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. And this, I guess for the next 30 or 35 minutes, we're going to talk about our story of how we put this, I think, a really cool story map together to focus on a certain aspect of what we're tasked to do here at the Water Reclamation District. I want to point out, before we get started, that myself, Josh, and Marty are from the IT department, and Jennifer is from our monitoring and research department. So it was really kind of a really nice collaborative effort to put this together. I thought the two departments worked really well getting it together. This first slide, what it basically is showing, one of our urban waterways, believe it or not, that waterway is not out in the middle of nowhere. That's the north channel up by Evanston, Illinois, which is just right connected north of Chicago. You can see all the canoers and are there any kayakers out there? But there's probably kayakers out there too. One of the cool things about this channel is that the Northwestern rowing and sculling team does all their training on this waterway. So just I'm not going to read the slide, but just a couple quick points about our history. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, which I'm going to call the district from here on out, is it's an independent government and taxing body that basically encompasses and services about 90% of Cook County and a little bit of areas outside of Cook County. It was originally organized as a sanitary district of Chicago in 1889, so we've been around a really long time. And it was in direct response to a long-standing problem with contamination of the water supplies and the waterways. Chicago gets all its water from the city of Chicago. So our waterways are really important, as is most of them, or all of them. And we were renamed in 1989 to the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. And it was to provide a more accurate perception of what the district currently functions and its responsibilities are. This picture here on the right is our Stickney Water Reclamation Plant, which is just outside of Chicago on the really close southwest suburbs, and it's one of the biggest facilities of its kind in the world. So I'll move on here. The district's mission, as we can read, it's to protect the health and safety of the public and its service area. But what we're going to focus on here, we're improving the quality of water in our water courses. We have about 883 square miles of Cook County that we deal with, and it's committed to excellence. All this information I'm giving you is on our website at MWRD.org, and this picture at the bottom here is our SEPA station number 5. It's on the confluence of the Kelsag and Main Channel in Lamont, Illinois. We've got a really cool story map, by the way, about our SEPA stations, and you can learn more about what they do by going to MWRD.org. The district operates 7 modern water reclamation plants. You can see them on the map. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but the Stickney Water Reclamation Plant is right here. That's the one on the picture. And they provide treatment for residential and industrial wastewater and stormwater, meeting permitted discharge limits at all times. On an average, the district treats about 1.4 billion gallons of wastewater each day, and the total wastewater capacity is over 2 billion gallons a day. And like I mentioned, that Stickney Water Reclamation Plant is one of the biggest of its kind in the world. with that, I'm going to hand off the presentation to Jennifer Wasik, who was our departmental person that drove that really drove this.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I manage the aquatic ecology and water quality section here at the district, and I'm going to describe to you some of the monitoring programs that we wanted to highlight in our public application. And what you'll notice as I go through this is that we collect a lot of data, and a sort of a common thread between all of these major monitoring programs that I'm about to speak about is that we needed a lot more effective and efficient way to share the information that we've generated. So all of our monitoring efforts kind of culminated in these annual PDF reports that were not exactly compelling tools for communicating with the public or conveying information. So for instance, if you take our ambient water quality monitoring program, which is described on the slide you see here, we collect monthly water quality data at 28 stations currently, and then we analyze these water quality samples for general water chemistry, including nutrients and metals, over 120 organic priority pollutants, chlorophyll, bacteria, and other physical parameters. And this iteration of the program began in 2001. So we got a lot of inquiries from the public and also from media and governmental and non-governmental agencies and universities. They want to use our data, or they want to know more about what we collect and where. And we have these annual PDF summary reports that are generally over 200 pages, and they have a lot of summary statistics, and they're definitely not ideal format for sharing. So it was a long, it's a long report, and you had to look up a table to cross-reference the station ID with a location on a map. There are a lot of appendices that had to be created and then formatted in Word. And we wanted something easier and more convenient and user-friendly. So our goals were basically to make data sharing easier for people, or data easier for people to access, and allow people to focus in on the reaches that were of interest to them. And then we were hoping to have some data download functionality. So, and then users that required more raw data for every parameter for analysis or something could still access the spreadsheets online or contact us directly. So this kind of started off with a request to our IT department to do a demo water quality application for a select few of our water quality parameters. So another program that we were hoping to highlight with the public application was our continuous dissolved oxygen monitoring. And for this program, we collect hourly information on dissolved oxygen, temperature, and conductivity in situ at 22 locations in our service area. And that equals about 578,000 readings annually. So obviously we needed a quick and easy way to summarize that data for the public. And the data is recorded hourly, but we don't have telemetry. So we retrieve these instruments, download the data, and then we perform a rigorous quality control checks on these data. And we wanted an application that would report our most recently QC'd data, basically. So again, these data were compiled into annual PDF reports, which are nice maybe for our internal reference in terms of being able to see time series graphs and so forth, but not exactly ideal for potentially interested outside parties. We invest a lot of resources into the program, so it's kind of a shame to bury the data and all of that effort into these boring PDF reports. And the nice thing about the apps and the story maps are that they might pull somebody in that wasn't even otherwise necessarily looking for DO data or dissolved oxygen data specifically, and then they would learn something about our organization and our commitment to monitoring. And you know, eventually we might like to move towards an open data portal like the USGS model, where we just collect the data and it gets put up on a website automatically. But I think this was actually a really good step, like an in-between step, to start to overcome some of our institutional barriers and concerns. But ultimately, maybe we'll move towards something like that. This is one of our pollution control technicians retrieving and replacing a water quality sonde in a housing. Basically, there's these stainless steel housing that contain our water quality monitors and protect them while they're collecting information. And this is in the main stem of the Chicago River, right downtown, as you can see the buildings behind it. And I think our most popular monitoring program is our biological monitoring. We've collected fish annually through a process called electrofishing since about 1974 at historically consistent locations. And we are looking for a way to share and summarize some of our basic fish metrics like abundance and species richness. Our annual reports often would come out with a lag time of a couple of years because after we generate the data, they kind of get bogged down in review for the report process and formatting and all of that. So these applications are a good tool for the casual water quality enthusiast as well as recreational fishermen in the area. It can give you some good tips as to where to find the kind of fish you're looking for. So now, rather than focusing on these annual or summer reports, my section can focus more on long-term trend reports or other targeted research. And in this photo, this is a colleague of mine, Tom Minarek, with a giant goldfish. And in the middle there, Pectinatella magnifica, which is a bryozoan or moss animal. That's just to show that you never know what you can pull out of an urban waterway like that. When you look, you find a lot of crazy stuff in the river. And finally, on the right, we have a picture of our electrofishing team who are on the main stem of the Chicago River collecting fish. So altogether, there's just been a huge increased recent interest from the public and media about the local Chicago waterways and MWRD's work and impact. So multiple Chicago waterway stakeholders ended up working together to create this Our Great Rivers vision, which was published about a year ago, and it has actionable goals for water quality, habitat, commerce, and recreation. And there's just a lot of momentum right now increasing for projects to improve recreational and aquatic life opportunities on these urban waterways. And there was also more stringent water quality standards implemented in July of 2015. So for all of these reasons, it was kind of an ideal time for us to launch these story maps just to give people the resources that they wanted and to add to the conversation on these urban ecology issues. This is just a photo of a black-crowned night heron, which is a state-endangered fish at our the North Branch Dam in the waterways. So IT ended up suggesting a GIS story map format to showcase our data, and we ended up working really closely with them and to get the best tool possible for efficient and effective spatially linked data sharing. And to tell you a little bit more about that process, I'm going to hand it back to Pat. Thanks.
So one of our big things is anytime we get a request in, we always try to solve the problem using stock Esri technologies first, whether it be a web app builder, a configurable template, a story map, ArcGIS Online. We actually try to look at this from that point where we don't write any application code, and then we move our thinking to try to start blending the architectures that we have available to us and the technology stack we have available to us to provide the final solution. So this one here you're going to see is a blended solution, and I will say it was done without writing any application code whatsoever, which I think is really cool. we did do some stuff on the back end. We got some pretty complex and creative spatial views going on for the data aggregation, and Python scripts that do data synchronization daily. On premise, we've got our ArcGIS servers, so we are hosting a service here in house, pulling data out of our enterprise geodatabase, and we have some feature map services that are hosted here. In our DMZ, we have obviously a web adapter, and we also, when we put all this, we ended up putting all this together, and we brought it's a series story map. You'll see. We ended up bringing the series story map template in-house and then deploying it on our public-facing GIS web server, so the application could end up with a MWRD.org extension. A lot of the content that's embedded that you'll see, it's really cool. It's a series story map with series story maps and web app builders embedded into them. So a lot of those ones where we don't see the address, we are hosting those on our GIS Online with registered service. So they're on-premise services that are registered with our GIS Online. All the functionality was basically presented through web app a bunch of web app builder apps. And we came about with the solution because we ran across a series story map and thought it was really cool, so we started experimenting with it. And as we started experimenting with it, we were noticing how we could start embedding other story maps and, like I said, other web app builders inside of story maps, inside of a series story map, and it worked out really well for us to be able to organize it and present it this way. One of the things I'm going to stress again is we did this without any application code, no custom web app builder widgets or anything. All the code, the little bit of code that was written was Python scripts for data synchronization. So right now I'm gonna hand off the presentation to Marty Monahan, who was one of the other IT members that worked on the application.
Hello, I'm Marty, GIS analyst here in the district IT department, and we'll do an overview of the design and start out here with talking about the story map design. I'll let you know we decided to divide our data into 3 distinct categories. The first category, fish monitoring data, consists of aggregated samples of individual fish gathered at various stations in the Chicago metro area. We chose to use a hosted web app builder app to provide the 4 queries used to expose the public to fish monitoring data. With this app, the public can see how often a fish is found, how many fish are found per year, how many species are found per year, and the locations where we've most recently monitored fish. The second set of apps pertains to continuous dissolved oxygen monitoring. These apps present daily and monthly dissolved oxygen data to the general public. To make the CDOM data accessible, we decided to create a series story map hosting a web app builder app and some configurable app templates. We share the most recently collected and validated DO data using a configurable app template. This gives the public a quick glance of DO levels in the Chicago area waterways. We used a web app builder to allow the public to query a date range of daily dissolved oxygen data and download it as a CSV to use in Excel. Lastly, we used a configurable template to show dissolved oxygen data over time. This time series map allows users to watch monthly dissolved oxygen levels change over time. This has the effect of summarizing and making accessible an over 5 million point data set spanning nearly 20 years of DO monitoring in a 2-minute animation. The final set of apps are designed to share data MWRD collects about water quality. Water samples are collected in the field, analyzed in the lab, and recorded in the lab software system. We integrate this data into the enterprise geodatabase on a nightly basis. While the different parameters are sampled on differing schedules, some quarterly, monthly, and so on, we aggregate this data yearly for public consumption. To share this data, we decided to use a web app builder application. We have 5 water quality parameters available, and they each have a query allowing the user to request a specific year of data. This data is downloadable in CSV formatted and is updated as samples are analyzed and approved in the lab. And with that, for a demo of this application, I'm going to turn this over to my fellow GIS analyst, Josh.
The moment everyone's been waiting for.
Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Josh Diamond, and I work with Pat and Marty on the GIS team. And I'm going to give everyone here a live demo of the story map we put together. So we're going to start with a quick introduction page that kind of just lets you know what the purpose of this story map is and what data you can expect to find here. So the first meaty page of our story map deals with our fish monitoring data, which the goal is to provide users with an easy and quick way to explore our fish monitoring data. Just as I said before, comes from fish individually sampled in the river with the electrofishing process. So to do this, we have configured a web app builder in ArcGIS Online and provided a couple different queries for users to look at our fish data. So one of the first one we're going to look at here is called Fish Species Abundance. And what this query does is it allows you to pick a species of fish, say common carp, execute the query, and then I can see how often the common carp occurs within the Chicago area waterway system. The symbology here is using graduated sizes to show you how many individuals are found on a yearly basis. So you'll see larger circles for more fish, smaller circles for less fish. If I want more information, I can always pull down a legend and see what the different sizes mean. But now, I don't know if any of you guys are recreational fishermen, but I am. And a far more interesting fish to look for would be something like a largemouth bass. So let me look at this fish instead. So here I can see where the concentrations of largemouth bass are. So I'm noticing that there seems to be quite a few in this southern region here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and maybe click on one of these. So here I can view more specific information. I can see that there's been a total of 752 fish here found over quite a number of years for an average of 53 a year. So this might be somewhere where I might want to go out there and get a bait in the water. The next query we provide is called Yearly Fish Counts. And what this query lets you do is to pick a year, say for example 2010, and we can see how many fish were found at our various stations that we sampled that year. And again, the symbology showing you the count of individuals. So where you see bigger circles, there were more fish found. Where you see smaller circles, there were less fish found. So I can click on any one of these and get some pretty detailed information on what was found here. So here I can see that there were 21 bluegills, 21 blunt-nosed minnow, a whole bunch of common carp, a lot of mosquito fish. So I'm getting that granular level of detail. And I'm also getting the number of individual species that were found. And last but not least, it'll tell me which waterway this data was collected on. So because this is a story map and we're trying to tell a story, the next query allows us to take that data but view it in a different way. This is called yearly fish species richness. And I'm going to run it for the same year, 2010. But now, instead of showing me how many fish were found, the symbology is telling me how many different species of fish were found. And I can click on the legend to see what that range was. And this is a different water quality parameter that can tell you things about the quality of the waterway system. So, for example, if I click here, I can see I have the same information accessible, but visually now I'm seeing where there's a large variety of species versus a lower variety. And the final query we offer for our fish monitoring data is called most recent fish counts. And this one's pretty straightforward. What it does is show you the most recent time we have collected fish at each station. So this might be of interest to someone who wants to know how recently was fish sampled near where I live. So moving on to the next page in our story map, which deals with continuous dissolved oxygen, or DO for short. We can see here that we are enjoying the flexibility of story maps. This page is essentially a series story map embedded inside of a series story map. And that kind of flexibility really helps you organize your data and share it effectively. The first thing we're seeing here is our most recently daily dissolved oxygen, which was built off of a configurable app template hosted in ArcGIS Online. This map is showing you the most recently collected and quality checked daily dissolved oxygen data that is recent within 3 months. So the results here are symbolized indicating the concentration of dissolved oxygen with breaks provided to us by Jennifer and her team. So I can get a quick glance, I can see that there are lower levels of oxygen here and higher levels towards downtown. And if I click on one of these points, I can see what the actual dissolved oxygen value is, as well as the temperature and the date that this sample was collected. Our next page here with sharing dissolved oxygen data is the daily dissolved oxygen tool. This one is a hosted web app builder, and its goal is to allow users to request daily average DO data over a specific date range. So let's say, for example, that I'm interested in knowing the daily DO levels in the month of December. So what I can do is specify that I'd like to go between 12/1 and 12/31 and run the query. And as this is a large data set, sometimes the query can take a little time to come back. There we go. So if I click on any one of these points, I should get a record for each day that we have sample data. So I can kind of look through and I'll see the same information. I'll see the same consistent symbology showing the levels of dissolved oxygen shared across these apps. But the most important tool here for the daily dissolve is the ability to export it as a CSV file so that you can do further analysis in spreadsheet software like Google Docs or Excel. So I'll just kind of show that here. So here we can see we have all of the data in detail for the month of December in 2016. Okay, moving on. The last page on our series story map here is the monthly dissolved oxygen over time. And this one was a configurable app template that presents a time series map. And for this app, we aggregated all the daily dissolved oxygen data into monthly buckets. And I'm going to kind of start it playing here as I kind of describe what's happening. So this essentially is allowing our users to visualize a 5 million record data set collected over nearly 20 years in a very brief animation. Users can see seasonal changes in DO, as well as changes in MWRD monitoring efforts. As time goes on, we add more stations. You can see those come online. So as we let this run for a minute, I'll ask Jennifer to share a few brief little tidbits of information about our DO monitoring efforts.
Yeah, so you can see over time, we had a pilot back early in the late 90s and early 2000s, and then we ended up increasing to our Calumet system and our weightable system. And then as time went on, we found that we had probably too much resolution. So over time, we ended up cutting back so that we just had basically about one monitor in each reach, basically. So you can see over time that the program has changed a bit, and you can also see, you know, how the average DO has changed over time as well.
Okay, now we're going to move on. Thank you, Jen, for elaborating for me. So the last content pane in the water quality series map, or the waterways story map, is going to be the water quality pane in application. And this one is another configurable web app builder that we've done. And this one, we show a quick disclaimer about recording limits, which I will ask Jen to briefly describe.
Yeah, so I was just concerned because our laboratory reporting limits may change year to year. And when we do put out sort of annual summary statistics, we use a certain convention for reporting and averaging these figures. So I was slightly concerned that however it was done in the application might result in ever so slightly different numbers, but to lab people that matters, right? So we're looking at just having something pop up when you start to use the app that just makes people aware that due to these averaging differences and conventions that we use, you might see some slightly different numbers.
Thank you, Jen, for that information. And we just wanted to show you that if you have data that doesn't perfectly fit, you can always use a tool like that to kind of explain it. So here, I'm just going to briefly look at two of the parameters that we've provided queries for. So again, like I said, this is a hosted web app builder. And we'll look at the first parameter, which is ammonia. And I'll grab a year at random, say 2011. And again, this data is as recent as we have approved in the laboratory. It's updated nightly and integrated into the GIS database as often as samples are approved. So here we kind of get an overview where we can see where there are higher and lower levels of ammonia in the waterway system in 2011. And the symbology you see here is not a defined range, but it was created using a Jenks natural breaks algorithm based on the entire data set from 2001 through today. So it kind of accurately represents buckets that will give you a good indication of high and low values. So, and this one we've chosen to summarize using an average, but if I click on any of these results, I can see how many samples were taken to produce the result, the min and max values found, and the average for these values. And I'll show one more parameter to show that we can represent this data differently. So I'll do 2011 again, this time for chloride data. So now we're visually seeing where there are high and low concentrations of chloride in the Chicago waterway system. For this one, median was a more meaningful way to summarize the data. So the symbology you see here is based on the median, and we will report the median as well. And as with the previous utility, we also have the ability to export this to a CSV file, where someone can then use Excel or Google Documents to make more detailed analysis of the data. So the final page we have on our story map is an additional resources page, which provides users with a link to the water quality monitoring homepage where they can find more information about the program, the old PDF reports, and so on. So this concludes the live demo of our story map. So I'll turn it back over to Pat for some closing comments.
There is the link for our for this particular application. I knew I put it in here somewhere. I was wondering where it came after the demo. So when the notes get posted, this will be in there, or anyone can just copy it down and start checking it out. We encourage you to. Here's some additional public GIS apps that we have done recently. They're clickable links. I'll put the raw URLs in the. I'll provide them for the in the question and answers, just in case the posting doesn't come out with clickable links.
Pat, we also included this as a downloadable document in the handout section. So if any of the attendees would like to download the handout, these links are there as well.
Okay, cool, thank you. Some of these other ones are really cool. The stormwater inundation mapping application shows, it has a lot of FEMA data integrated with it. The SEPA station is the picture you saw earlier at the beginning of the presentation, and that shows the story of our SEPA stations, which you could see mean side stream elevated pool aeration, so they aerate the water. That's a story map, by the way. Restoring the canopy, we have a program where we give out oak saplings. Is that the correct term, saplings? Okay. And this is a little less map-centric of a story map, but it tells a story of how giving these trees out and restoring our canopy will help the wastewater, stormwater. Basically, we're at the end. So.
Yep, thank you, Pat, and the rest of you. Good webinar. Let's go ahead. One question, we do have a couple of the QCing and the data, their average time that takes to get posted.
Yeah, it just depends on which program. So for the biological, our goal would be eventually to try and get that uploaded by March or so of the following year. The other ones are quicker. The ambient water quality monitoring, my understanding is as soon as our lab analyzes and approves it, they put it in our LIMS, or Laboratory Information Management System, and then at night it's been uploaded here, I guess.
That's correct. As soon as that data is approved by our labs, it goes live.
Mm-hmm. And then with the continuous dissolved oxygen monitoring, we have 3-week deployments for our schedule. So when we get our information back and download the data and perform all of our quality control checks, it could be a couple months before that goes live.
Great, thank you. We also had a couple questions about spatial views. You mentioned this during the presentation. Can you just explain what spatial views are for your content and a little bit more about your data aggregation?
I'm going to let Josh handle that question.
So a spatial view is, in the simplest terms as possible, a view that has data and gives it spatial context. So what we specifically did was, the data that we're getting was not GIS data in most of the cases. So we wrote a couple of views in SQL Server to kind of aggregate that data, and then we used a spatial view in our catalog to take that tabular data and attach it to geographic data of all the different collection stations to give it spatial context.
Great, thank you. Another question we have, which is interesting to me, is how do you track the people that view the story map? Can you do that? And then also, do you keep track of who or how many times the data is downloaded?
We've not put any analytics on it yet. We were actually just talking about that before the meeting to start monitoring the usage. So that's probably going to be one of the things that we're going to look at next with a lot of our GIS content, using an analytic tool to see the track that hits on the site.
Great. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how many people are interested enough to download the data. So that's a great next step.
So guys, I've got a question on, you're talking about next steps of them trying to understand how much of the public is engaging. One of the things I did notice and throughout the story maps that you're using the dark gray background, and so when you look at ArcGIS Online and you can use any of the base maps in your web maps, and there's a half a dozen there that you can choose from. But we've noticed, just like you did, that the dark gray is really useful because it makes your data then kind of pop, right? So the eyes are drawn to the data, not necessarily the base map. But in the aesthetics, as an engineer, I create horrible maps, in my opinion, just because I go for shock and awe sometimes, and I my cartography leaves a lot to be desired. But did you work with like your public information office at all, and kind of because you knew this was going out to the public, you said you have increased public awareness and interest in the rivers. Is there has this brought other parts of your organization together in creating these story maps that you really didn't think about?
Yeah, we did. After we had a sort of draft version, we did have someone in our public affairs office look at it and give comments, and he happens to be my husband too, so that was easy to get him to participate. Probably listening now, so shout out to Justin. But yeah, they were able to make some suggestions to try and make, within the confines of what you can do in the story map to try and improve the visuals.
Yeah, and the dark gray background, like you were saying, was making some of the color, the slight color variations in the symbology. It just makes it pop and stand out at you better. So, like you're saying, it puts the focus on the data in the story rather than the underlying map behind it.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say that's what we're starting to hear, from some organizations there, is that, as they start to do these story maps, it's usually the public affairs or public information office that kind of, says, well, wait a minute, is that GIS? I didn't know you guys could make, like really cool maps. They thought it was just, the field map books, right, that went into the trucks. It's like, no, this is a very immersive multimedia environment now. And so, yeah, it's great to hear that you got your public affairs office involved.
And with that black background, we were able to take the feature class of the waterways that we actually monitor and bring them really out to the forefront.
Yeah.
Public affairs was also supportive in then getting the word out that we had created this app and putting out a press release, and so that was helpful too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it looks really good. Let's go on to another question, and we just have a few more minutes. So you had mentioned using different web apps within your story map. One of the specific questions that came in was, do each of the panes in the story map look at different web apps, or are you using the same web app for multiple panes in the story map? Does that make sense?
If I'm wrong, but it's a different web app or configurable template for each section of the application, I should say. When you put web app builders together and you put story maps, you do have an underlying map in ArcGIS Online. So we have a set of maps and web app builders. So no, yes and no. For each section, it's definitely new apps. But within the section, the app is almost the same, or a lot of times they're shared. Is that correct?
So yeah, Pat's pretty spot on there, but I'd just like to also add and elaborate that really you can embed pretty much whatever you want in a series story map. So we chose to embed configured web app builders, other story maps, and configured app templates, but there's really no reason why we couldn't have embedded, say, a YouTube video if that had something we wanted to communicate,
Or a PDF.
A PDF report, or a custom written application. I mean, it's pretty limitless. The series story map is incredibly flexible.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, that's, you know, and that's what we try to highlight, and I think you just nailed it. You know, that you know, because what you were showing looks like, you know, thousands and thousands of lines of code, and it's really these configured configured templates, and we kind of have a saying, you know, at Esri at times that it's just a URL. You know, and we're even using this to prevent, you know, something as complicated as like insights, where we're getting into the fully interactive, you know, big data analytics. Insights is just a URL. If you, in the end, that you know, the presentation layer. So you can embed all sorts of things, and I say you nailed that. It's you can be as simple as you want or as complex as you want, and you know, that's kind of what has, I think, you know, made our software better than ever. Is this web map is that single glue. That web map, it can run ArcGIS Pro, it can run your story maps, it can run Collector, it can run, you know, any web application that you want. It's that use once, or, you know, create once, use many. So the web map has just really, you know, transformed how we think about everything and do GIS. So, and you folks have put together an amazing collection of what looks like a very seamless application with, you know, bringing lots of data to the public. So, great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like it as well. I think we have time for maybe one more question. We have a question about use of the story map, and if you guys have had any feedback from colleagues outside of your department, or even public feedback or responses, as far as, do you find that the story map is easy to use, and are they using it and figuring out where to go and what to do? And second part of that question would be, do you include any kind of directions anywhere that explains what the data is and how to run those queries, or do you assume that it's pretty self-explanatory?
We're assuming a lot of the stuff is self-explanatory, but on the main page of the app itself, on the sidebar, there's a lot of text and background about what the app is supposed to show you and everything.
Awesome, thank you. We're just about out of time. I see that David switched slides to our Esri Water Conference, so we'll just use this last second to plug our conference that's coming up in January 2018. If you guys aren't aware of it, we do host a water conference. Esri's water team will be there on site. We hope you all can join us. And again, I'd like to thank the whole team today for presenting. It was a great webinar. I love your story map, and thank you again. Have a great day. Hopefully you'll join us next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.